I was standing near the counter of our small town shop, just watching the usual afternoon quiet settle in. The kind of place where everybody knows your name, and stories float through the air like the soft hum of an old radio. Nothing much ever happens here, until that day. The bell above the door jingled softly, and in walked an elderly man. He moved slowly, careful with each step, like he was carrying a weight no one else could see. His clothes were simple, worn but clean, and hanging around his neck was an old, faded medal. Not just any medal, this one looked like it had been through battles, storms, and time itself. The medal was dull, scratched, but it carried a quiet kind of pride that seemed to fill the whole room. I watched as the shop owner's eyes landed on that medal. At first it was just a glance, nothing much, but then, I saw the look change. There was a flicker of something harsh, almost like a sneer hidden behind his polite smile. The way his eyebrows twitched made me uneasy. The man approached the counter slowly, placing a few coins on the counter. I could see the medal hanging heavily against his chest. The shop owner leaned forward, smirking just a little too much for someone serving a customer. "That old thing," he said, loud enough for a few others nearby to hear. "Looks like something from a flea market, not a medal worth bragging about." His voice was sharp, mocking. The words hung in the air like a cold wind. The old man didn't say anything at first. He just looked at the shop owner steady and quiet. But I could feel the tension stretch tight, like the whole room was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. That quiet man with the worn medal wasn't just any customer. Behind that medal was a story few knew, and it was one I want to share. He wasn't born into anything special. In fact, he grew up in a small, dusty town much like ours, where jobs were scarce and dreams felt heavy. His family struggled to get by. His father worked long hours at a factory, his mother took in sewing, and the boy, well, he learned early what it meant to be responsible. When the war broke out, he was just a young man, barely out of his teens. Like many others, he wanted to do his part, not because he craved glory, but because he believed in something bigger than himself. He wanted to protect his home, his family, and the world he knew, so he enlisted. The years that followed were hard, far harder than most people imagine. He was sent overseas, into places no one back home wanted to hear about. The mud, the cold, the endless noise of war, it wore down his body and soul. He lost friends, brothers in arms, who had laughed and dreamed right alongside him one day, and the next were gone. There were nights when he could barely breathe, haunted by memories that no metal could erase. That medal he wore around his neck. It wasn't just a piece of metal, it was a symbol of every sacrifice he made, every moment of fear he faced, and every life he tried to save. It carried the weight of his pain, the silent pride of having survived, and the respect he held for those who didn't. He never talked much about the war, he kept it tucked away, like a chapter in a book he didn't want to reopen. But if you looked close, you could see it in his eyes, the quiet strength, the deep sadness, and the unwavering courage. To most people, it might have just looked like an old rusty medal, but to him, it was everything. It was a reminder of who he was, what he had given, and why he still stood tall, even when the world seemed to forget. That day in the shop, I could see all of that behind his calm face. He wasn't just a man with an old medal, he was a living story of bravery, loss, and hope. And I knew that mocking him wasn't just rude, it was something much worse. Back in the shop, the old man stood quietly by the counter, his eyes steady but tired. The shop owner, however, wasn't done. He leaned a little closer, lowering his voice just enough for the whole front of the store to hear. "Honestly," the owner said, glancing at the medal with a sneer, "what good is that old thing anymore? Looks like a piece of junk someone dug out of the dirt. You don't need that kind of souvenir nowadays. Times have changed." He chuckled, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was sharp, like a knife slicing through the stillness. People don't care about wars from decades ago, they care about cash, new gadgets, and moving forward. That medal, it's just a dusty relic, a reminder of a time no one really wants to remember. A few customers nearby shifted uncomfortably. One woman crossed her arms and looked away, clearly unsettled. Another young man tried to hide a frown behind his hand, but no one spoke up. The room felt colder, as if the owner's words had sucked the warmth right out of it. The old man said nothing at first. His hands clenched slightly on the counter, knuckles white. His eyes didn't leave the shop owner's face, but behind that calm gaze I could see something else hurt. Not anger, not bitterness, just a quiet pain that seemed to stretch deep inside him. "Sir," the owner added, still mocking, "maybe it's time to hang that thing up for good. No one's interested in your stories, they want real things, things that matter today." The old man's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, the shop was deathly silent. It was like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what he would say. Some customers glanced around nervously, unsure if they should intervene. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, without raising his voice or showing anger, the old man finally spoke. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that stopped everyone in their tracks. "Maybe you don't understand what that metal means," he said quietly. "Maybe it's not about what people want today. Maybe it's about what people like me lived through yesterday." His words were simple, but they echoed through the room like thunder in the quiet. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just a man wearing an old medal. This was someone with a story that demanded to be heard. The old man looked around the shop slowly, his eyes meeting those of the people who had been watching, waiting. Then, without raising his voice or showing any anger, he began to speak. "I didn't come here to argue," he said softly, "but maybe it's time you all hear why this medal means more than just some old medal." He took a deep breath, and for a moment, the shop was still. Even the bell above the door seemed to pause its ringing. "This medal," he said, touching it gently, "was given to me after a day I'll never forget. It was a day when I lost more than I ever thought I could. It was the day I learned what real sacrifice means." He paused, looking down for a second before continuing. "I was sent to a place far from home, a place filled with danger, where the ground was soft with mud, and the air was thick with smoke and fear. My unit was ordered to hold a position, no matter what." The people in the shop leaned in a little closer, even those who had been indifferent before. "That day," he said quietly, "we were surrounded, outnumbered. We were fighting not just for ourselves, but for the families waiting for us back home, for the people who believed we could protect them." He swallowed hard, voice catching slightly, but he kept going. "One of my closest friends, James, he saved me that day, twice, but in the end, he didn't make it." I held his hand as he took his last breath. "The medal isn't just mine, it's his too. A reminder of his courage, and of all the friends who never came back." The room was completely silent now. You could feel the weight of his words pressing down on everyone there. "I don't wear this medal to show off," he said, looking at the shop owner. "I wear it to remember those moments, the fear, the loss, the hope. It's a promise to never forget what we went through, and to honor those who gave everything so others could live in peace." The shop owner's face went quiet, the usual sneer replaced by something harder to read. Some customers' eyes were moist, others stared at the floor, unsure where to look. The old man's voice grew softer but no less strong. "If you can't see the value in this medal, maybe it's because you've never had to fight for something bigger than yourself. Maybe you've never had to lose a friend, or a part of your own soul." He looked directly at the shop owner again. "That medal is more than old metal, it's the story of courage, sacrifice and love. And if you mock it, you mock all of us who lived it." The silence that followed was heavy, full of something unspoken but deeply felt. No one moved for a long moment. Then, slowly the old man reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small, faded photo. He handed it quietly to the shop owner. "This is James," he said, "the friend who gave me this medal. Maybe now you understand." The shop owner took the photo, his fingers trembling slightly. For the first time his eyes softened, and the hardness that had filled the room began to melt away. Everyone in the shop was changed by that moment. The old man's calm courage, his quiet strength, it silenced the whole store, leaving nothing but respect behind. The shop owner stared down at the faded photo in his hands, his fingers trembling as if holding something far heavier than paper. The face in the picture was young, full of hope despite the shadows under his eyes, the face of a man who had given everything. He looked up slowly at the old soldier, confusion and something like regret flickering in his eyes. The old man's voice was steady but soft as he continued. there's something else you should know, something that might change how you see all of this. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. You see, the friend in this photo, James, he wasn't just anyone. He saved someone very dear to this town, someone who means a lot to this shop. The shop owner's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition flashing. His voice caught as he asked, "Who?" The soldier looked directly at him, the room now utterly silent except for their quiet exchange. "Your father." The shop owner's breath hitched. "My father." The old man nodded slowly. "It was years ago during a mission nobody else thought could be done. James risked everything to save your father when he was trapped behind enemy lines. Without him you wouldn't be standing here today, and without this medal, you wouldn't have the story of a brave man who gave his life for someone he barely knew, someone he believed was worth saving." The shop owner's face flushed with a deep, burning shame. His proud, mocking stance crumbled as the realization sank in. The very man he had belittled was connected to his family, to the legacy he himself carried. His insults weren't just rude, they were an attack on a part of his own history, on the man who had saved his father's life. He looked away, unable to meet the old soldier's calm, steady gaze. The weight of his own words pressed down on him, heavy and unforgiving. I didn't know," he whispered, voice barely audible. The old man gave a small nod, the corners of his lips lifting in a faint, forgiving smile. "That's why I've stayed quiet all these years, because sometimes respect doesn't come from medals or medals alone, it comes from the stories behind them." Around the shop, the customers shifted, their earlier discomfort replaced by a quiet understanding. Some nodded subtly, others wiped away a tear. The mood softened, transformed from tension to something far more human. The shop owner took a deep breath, the embarrassment clear in his eyes, but also something else, an opening. "I'm sorry," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I was wrong, I shouldn't have spoken like that. Not about you, not about what you've been through." The soldier shook his head gently. "Apologies aren't always easy, but they matter. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next." The owner looked at the medal again, a new respect shining in his eyes. "Thank you, for everything." The soldier nodded, and for a moment there was peace in the room, something quiet and honest. I watched the exchange, feeling the heavy weight of history and healing all in one small shop. Sometimes the most important stories come when we least expect them, and the hardest lessons teach us the most. From that day on, the medal wasn't just a piece of old metal in that shop, it became a symbol, not just of war or sacrifice, but of connection, forgiveness, and the power of understanding. The shop owner took a long breath, still holding the photo like something sacred. His voice trembled as he looked up at the old soldier. "I never knew," he said quietly. "All these years, I've heard stories about my dad's time in the war, but he never gave details. He always said someone saved him, but he never told me who. I guess I didn't care enough to ask. I just assumed it didn't matter anymore." He looked around the shop, at the silent witnesses to his mistake. "I'm sorry, truly, not just for what I said today, but for not understanding what that medal stands for, what you stand for." The old man smiled gently, the lines on his face softening. "It's all right, we forget sometimes. Life moves fast, and it's easy to overlook the things that brought us here. But the fact that you're standing here now, remembering that means something." He reached across the counter, his hand firm, strong, despite his age, and the two men shook hands. That moment, it felt like something shifted. A woman near the back stepped forward. "My grandfather had a medal just like that," she said softly. "He never talked about the war either. Now I wish I'd asked more." A young man added, "My brother serves. He always says the hardest part isn't what he does out there. It's feeling like no one here remembers why he does it." One by one, people began to speak, sharing stories, memories, quiet words of respect. The mood in the shop changed completely. It wasn't just a store anymore. It felt like a place where something important had happened, a place where hearts had opened. I stood there watching it unfold, and felt something stir deep in my chest. Sometimes it takes one person's quiet strength to remind the rest of us what matters. As the old soldier turned to leave, the shop owner stepped out from behind the counter, and followed him to the door. "Wait," he said. "Please come back sometime. I'd like to hear more about James, about all of it. I think I need to." The soldier nodded. I'd like that. And then he was gone, just like he came, quiet, steady, and with more dignity than most people carry in a lifetime. I looked around at the faces in the room. No one saw an old man with a rusty medal anymore. They saw a hero, a teacher, a reminder. And I'll never forget that day, when a stranger walked into a shop and left behind a lesson we all needed. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, I invite you to take a moment right now to like this video. It helps us share these powerful emotional stories with more people who might need them. Have you ever witnessed a moment like this? Maybe you've seen someone stand up for what's right, or maybe you've been reminded of someone's quiet strength in your own life. If so, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. This is a place where we listen, reflect, and grow together. And if you believe in spreading kindness, respect, and gratitude, especially for those who've sacrificed so much, please consider subscribing to the channel. There are many more stories like this one waiting to be told. Share this video with someone you care about. You never know whose heart it might touch, or whose perspective it might change. Let's keep remembering the sacrifices that built the lives we live today. Let's choose to honor others, even in small ways. And above all, let's choose compassion. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep your heart open.